The silence of the Appalachian foothills was normally a thick, comfortable blanket, undisturbed save for the rustling of pine needles and the distant, mournful call of a train. But lately, in the isolated township of Echo Creek, the silence felt wrong. It felt expectant, like the quiet before a scream. Ethan Cole, a freelance archival photographer in his late 20s, was oblivious to the creeping dread. He'd come to Echo Creek for a job that sounded both dull and oddly specific, digitally cataloging the contents of the defunct local history museum before the building was condemned. The museum, a crumbling granite structure built in the 1920s, had been closed for 15 years after a disastrous electrical fire destroyed a third of its collection. Just get the pics, Cole. Everything. The boxes, the dusty dioramas, even the broken pottery shards, the city council's email had stipulated. We need a record of everything before the wrecking ball hits. On his third day, deep in the museum's claustrophobic basement, Ethan found the anomaly. The basement was a labyrinth of forgotten things, smelling of mildew, ozone, and old secrets. He was working his way through a row of wooden crates marked, PRE Fire Salvage, 1947, when he found a crate that didn't belong. It was a modern, plastic storage bin, the kind you buy at a big box store, sealed with industrial-strength tape. It was labeled in crisp, black marker, Specimen 711, Do Not Open, J. Vance. Ethan was a professional. He knew the rule, photograph first, ask questions later. He carefully cut the tape, the sound echoing unnervingly in the subterranean space. Inside, nestled in protective foam, was not an artifact, but a device that was roughly the size of a shoebox, fashioned from a matte black metal that seemed to drink the light. There were no seams, no screws, only a single, perfectly circular lens on the top face, and a small, faintly glowing green LED the size of a pinhead. It pulsed with a rhythm that was too slow to be a heartbeat, too fast to be a beacon, a languid, unsettling thump-thump, thump-thump. As Ethan raised his camera to photograph it, the lens on the device clicked, a dry, mechanical sound that seemed to come not from the object, but from the air around it. The green light intensified, turning a sharp, almost aggressive amber. A wave of dizzying nausea hit Ethan. He stumbled, his vision blurring, the familiar basement environment suddenly twisting, the shadows elongating and receding at impossible angles. It was like vertigo mixed with a sudden, profound sense of déjà vu, but not of something he had experienced, but something he shouldn't have experienced. When his vision cleared, the air felt thick, heavy, and the amber light had settled back to a mild green. The device was exactly where it had been, humming silently. Ethan checked the photos. The first shot was normal. The second, taken just as the light changed, was horrifying. The image showed the basement, but the exposure was wrong. Everything was faded, sepia-toned, as if the photo had been taken decades ago. And in the corner, just beyond the edge of the crate, was a fleeting, indistinct shadow, a figure that seemed to be wearing clothing from the 1940s, its face blurred and featureless, caught in the act of turning away. Ethan shivered, rationalizing it as a camera glitch, a lighting fluke. He took a deep breath, focusing on the job. He carefully packed the strange device back into its bin, resealed the tape, and logged its existence, but the seed of unease had been planted. Later that evening, back in his rented cabin overlooking the creek, he found an unmarked folder on his camera's memory card. It contained one file, a grainy, short video clip. He hadn't taken any video. He pressed play. The video was shot from the perspective of his own eyes. It showed his hands meticulously unsealing the plastic bin in the museum basement. He watched himself find the device, the black box. But then, the video continued for another 30 seconds. He didn't remember. In the clip, he picks up the device, turning it over in his hands. He leans close to the faint green light, and his voice, slightly distorted and low, whispers, "It's here. It followed me." Then, the lens on the device flashes a blinding, violent white, and the video cuts to a screeching, static-filled void. Ethan stared at the screen, his blood turning to ice. Who was he talking to? What had followed him? And how could he have filmed himself doing something he didn't remember doing? He looked out the cabin window. The lights of Echo Creek were few and far between. The blanket of silence had returned, but now, it felt less like a blanket and more like a shroud. Suddenly, a loud, sharp knock rattled his front door. Ethan froze, every muscle tight. No one in this remote town knew he was here. That he waited. Another knock. Slower. Heavier. More deliberate. "Hello," he called out, his voice thin, silenced. That he crept to the door and peered through the small peephole. Standing on his porch was a man. Tall, gaunt, dressed in a faded, ill-fitting suit that looked like it had been tailored decades ago. The man's face was obscured by the dim porch light, but Ethan could make out one horrifying detail. The man was holding a small, black object in his hand. That it was the same size and shape as the device in the museum basement. And on its surface, a pinprick of light pulsed a silent, insistent amber. The man didn't move. He didn't knock again. He simply stood there, waiting, watching the peephole. Ethan slowly backed away from the door, his heart hammering against his ribs, a single, terrifying thought echoing in the silence of the cabin: it wasn't a glitch. The device didn't just record the past. It recorded a past. And whoever, or whatever, was at the door, knew he had found it. Ethan didn't move for what felt like an hour, every nerve ending screaming at him to run, but his fear had rooted him to the floor. The man in the ill-fitting suit remained perfectly still on the porch, a silent, amber-lit sentinel. Finally, the man moved. He didn't walk away, nor did he break down the door. He simply raised the black device to his ear, as if listening to a faint signal, and then slowly, deliberately, turned his back and walked into the deep shadows of the Appalachian night. The ambient sound of the woods swallowed him whole. Ethan waited another 10 minutes, his hand clutching a heavy flashlight. He flicked the deadbolt open and cautiously cracked the door. Nothing. The porch was empty, save for a thin layer of dew already settling on the wooden planks. That he stepped outside, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. He scanned the porch floor and the surrounding mud. No footprints. The ground was too damp for him to miss any. The man had either vanished into thin air or moved with impossible stealth. Just as he was about to retreat, his flashlight beam snagged on something small and white tucked into the corner of the door jamb. It was a business card, crisp and clean. That he picked it up. The card was thick, cream-colored stock, the font severe and vintage. It read, J. VNC Temporal Acquisition Specialist, the Echo Creek Foundation, Archives Division, Recordings of the Improbable Present. Ethan's blood ran cold again. J. Vance. The name on the modern plastic bin in the museum basement. The man on the porch was the owner of the device, or at least, associated with the entity that stored it. And the title, Temporal Acquisition Specialist, was too surreal to be a prank. That he rushed back inside, locking the door and sealing the windows. The image of the amber light burned into his mind. He pulled out his laptop and connected the camera, examining the video clip again. The one where he whispers, "It's here. It followed me. Followed me." Who? And from when? He decided to ditch the archival photos and focus on the truth of this town. He typed the name J. Vance and Echo Creek Foundation into the search bar. The results were sparse, fragmented. The Echo Creek Foundation had existed as a tax-exempt entity from 1945 to 1952. Its stated purpose was the preservation of local timelines and acquisition of anomalous history. It was headed by a single trustee, a Dr. Silas Vance, J. Vance's father, perhaps. The foundation dissolved abruptly in 1952, its assets seized by the state, the official reason cited as unauthorized, dangerous experimentation. As he scrolled through a digitized 1947 newspaper clipping about the foundation, Ethan noticed a faint distortion on his laptop screen, like heat haze. The image of the article wavered. He instinctively glanced at the corner of the room, near the shadows where the wall met the ceiling. A flicker. Not of light, but of color. A subtle, sepia-toned ripple in the AIR.IT was the same distortion he'd seen in the basement photo. He froze, holding his breath. The ripple coalesced, focusing like a lens. It was a man, indistinct and slightly transparent, standing in the corner. He was wearing the same style of clothing as the figure in the glitch photo, a fedora, a double-breasted suit, and he was looking directly at Ethan. The specter didn't move. It simply existed, a snapshot of the past superimposed onto the present, watching him with a blank, featureless face. It was silent, yet its presence was a deafening roar of wrongness. Ethan snatched his camera and aimed it, fingers shaking on the shutter button. Click, the flash momentarily illuminated the cabin. When his eyes adjusted, the figure was gone. The air was clear. The sepia distortion had vanished. He checked the photo. Normal. Just the empty corner of his cabin, but as he zoomed in, he saw it, a tiny, barely visible smudge on the wallpaper, right where the man had been standing. It wasn't dust. It was a fine, reddish-brown powder, like iron oxide, or dried blood. He swiped the powder with his thumb and brought it close to his eye. It smelled faintly of old gasoline and ozone. Then, he heard a new noise. A faint tick-tick-tick coming from his duffel bag. He opened the bag and rummaged through his equipment until he found the culprit, the black device he had carefully sealed and placed inside its plastic bin. The tape was still intact. The bin was unopened, yet, the device was outside the bin, resting on his clean shirts, and its small LED light was pulsing a frantic, rapid, violent red. He picked up the black box. It was warm to the touch, and the rhythmic tick-tick-tick was coming from within. It sounded like a badly malfunctioning clock. Suddenly, the red light began to flash a Morse code-like sequence, dot. Dash. Dash. Dot. Dot. Dash. Ethan recognized the pattern immediately. He had been a ham radio enthusiast in his teens. It was a single letter, repeated endlessly. SSSSS. The red light continued its silent, urgent cry of S, for distress, for save us. The door to his cabin, which he had double-checked and triple-locked, slowly, excruciatingly began to creak open from the outside. He didn't need the peephole this time. The smell of cold air and ancient mildew wafted in. A low, raspy voice drifted into the cabin, a sound like dried leaves scraping stone. The loop is closing, Mr. Cole. Give me the chronometer. Or you join the rest of the fixed points. The figure of J. Vance stepped into the light, but he was subtly different. His eyes were wide, bloodshot, and his lips were pulled back in a horrific, fixed smile that showed too much gum. He held nothing in his hand this time. He didn't need to. The ambient light of the room seemed to bend away from him, leaving him perpetually half-shrouded in shadow. Ethan tightened his grip on the black device, the S light flashing furiously. He knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that giving up the device meant forfeiting his reality. The time for questions was over. The time for running was now. The cabin door was barely ajar, but the menace emanating from J. Vance was absolute. The man's fixed, horrible smile seemed less an expression of triumph and more a symptom of deep, internal pain. Ethan didn't hesitate. Survival instinct overrode paralyzing fear. Instead of lunging for the back window, which would expose him, he hurled the heavy camera tripod he was holding directly at Vance's face. The impact was sickeningly solid. The tripod connected, and Vance stumbled back with a guttural, choked sound, a sound that was less of human agony and more of grinding metal. Ethan bolted. He didn't bother with his laptop or gear. He tucked the black device, the chronometer, into the front pocket of his jacket and scrambled out the back window. He landed hard in a thicket of rhododendrons, ignoring the sharp, tearing pain in his shoulder. The woods were a black maze, the moonless night offering zero visibility. He ran blindly towards the faint, distant sound of the creek, his lungs burning, the frantic, silent red light of the device pressed against his chest. Behind him, a different sound emerged from the cabin, not the slam of a door, but a terrifying shattering noise, followed by heavy, rhythmic footsteps striking the wooden floorboards. Vance wasn't chasing him, he was hunting him, moving with an unnatural, purposeful gait. Ethan finally burst through the tree line, stumbling onto the muddy bank of Echo Creek. The water was shallow, rushing cold over slick stones. He plunged in, hoping the running water would mask his scent and footsteps. He looked back. Vance was standing at the edge of the woods, a silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. Vance didn't enter the water. He simply raised a hand, pointing a finger at Ethan. Then, Vance spoke, his voice carrying over the rushing creek, clear and chillingly devoid of echo. You stole it from the point of origin, Cole. And now the sequence is unstable. Every moment you exist outside your assigned locus, the past degrades. You become an anomaly, a ghost that bleeds across timelines. As he finished speaking, Vance's head tilted slightly. The man's face, still partially obscured by shadow, seemed to shift, not in movement, but in substance. For a terrifying split second, Ethan saw not Vance, but the indistinct, sepia-toned face of the man from the basement photograph, superimposed on Vance's body. The specter's eyes were black voids. Ethan turned and ran deeper into the creek, stumbling towards the town's only bridge, several hundred yards upstream. While running, his fingers found the black device in his jacket pocket. The rapid, pulsing S was gone. The LED was now a steady, hypnotic blue that he pulled it out. The rhythmic tick-tick-tick had changed. It was now a smooth, fast whirring, like the spooling of a reel-to-reel tape recorder. On the flat top face, where the circular lens was, a faint, translucent image began to materialize, hovering just above the metal. It was a live, silent video feed. It showed an overhead view of a dimly lit street corner in Echo Creek. A woman was walking her dog, oblivious, but as Ethan watched, the image on the chronometer glitched, the street corner instantly transformed. The modern sidewalk cracked, turning into muddy cobblestone. The streetlights flickered and became old gas lamps. The woman's puffy jacket was suddenly replaced by a long, 1940s-era coat. The dog vanished, replaced by a large, stray cat that disappeared down an alley. The glitch lasted less than a second. Then, everything snapped back to the modern, mundane scene. The woman was still walking her dog. Ethan stopped, chest heaving. The device wasn't just recording or showing the past. It was showing him two simultaneous realities, and the possibility of the past overriding the present. The blue light on the chronometer intensified, and a single, new image appeared below the lens, etched onto the metal casing itself, as if engraved by a laser. It was a complex geometric symbol, an eye enclosed in a broken circle, with three small, angular lines pointing away from the break. Suddenly, a voice, clearer than before and distinctly feminine, emanated from the device. It was strained, synthesized, like a ghost speaking through static. Ethan. The symbol. It's the key to the locus. The fracture is widening. You have to find the other point. The voice cut off with a painful electronic screech. The blue light dissolved, and the LED went completely dark. The bridge was now in sight. Ethan scrambled onto the slick asphalt. As he reached the center of the bridge, the silence was broken by the deafening sound of an engine. A beat-up, black 1950s-era sedan, a model Ethan vaguely recognized from an old black-and-white film, roared out of the darkness and screeched to a halt right in front of him, blocking his path. The driver's side window rolled down, slowly, manually, with a squeal of rusted metal. Behind the wheel was a woman in her late 40s. Her hair was pulled back severely, and she wore thick, opaque glasses that hid her eyes. She wore a severe, vintage dress. She looked utterly normal, utterly detached, yet utterly terrifying. She didn't smile like Vance. She simply looked at the dark device in Ethan's hand, then up at his face. "Ethan Cole," she stated flatly, her voice dry as parchment. "You are an unauthorized variable. Vance's methods are messy, but he is correct. You are destabilizing the fixed loop." She gestured towards the passenger seat. "Get in. We can't allow the Echo Creek Chronos fracture to become universal. We have to reset your timeline. Or, we let the past consume everything." The chilling part was that she wasn't threatening him, she was stating a horrible scientific necessity. Ethan looked back down the creek. Vance was gone. But he knew the man was circling. He clutched the device. Reset his timeline. That sounded a lot like deletion. The other point. He whispered, recalling the synthesized voice from the chronometer. "The other point is the anchor," the woman replied, her face remaining expressionless. "And you, Mr. Cole, are not it." Ethan stood at the center of the old concrete bridge, the black 1950s sedan blocking his escape route into Echo Creek. The woman behind the wheel, whose name he didn't know, emanated a cold, bureaucratic calm far more frightening than J. Vance's feral aggression. "Reset your timeline," Ethan repeated, clutching the now silent chronometer. "What exactly does that entail?" The woman sighed, a small, impatient gesture that only added to her unnerving air of authority. "My name is Agent Delta. And what it entails is the controlled erasure of the variable, you, Mr. Cole, to prevent the local temporal anomaly, the Chronos fracture, from becoming a cascade failure." She tapped a finger on the wheel. "The device in your hand is a localized temporal recording unit. It isn't from the past, it records specific points within a fixed loop. When you opened its container, you pulled its point of origin, a version of you from the 1940s, out of its fixed locus. He became Vance. Vance is chasing a version of himself that fled a fixed moment." Ethan's mind reeled. "Wait. You're saying J. Vance is me? A possible you. A failed you," Agent Delta corrected clinically. "In 1947, a man named Jesse Vance, Dr. Silas Vance's son, was conducting unauthorized temporal experiments under the guise of the Echo Creek Foundation. He failed to contain his prototype chronometer, and a temporal feedback loop created a duplicate, a fleeting, phantom version of him that witnessed the failure. That phantom, the one in the sepia photo, became the aggressive anomaly known as J. Vance. You found the device in the museum where Jesse Vance's original lab was. By touching it, you activated a resonance, a kinship. You've woken the loop." She leaned closer, the opaque glasses reflecting the faint lights of the town. "Jesse Vance, now J. Vance, needs the device to stabilize his phantom existence by forcing it back into the original timeline's physical form. But if he succeeds, he collapses the entire current timeline of Echo Creek into 1947. That's the fracture. My job is to prevent that by deleting the catalyst, the man who opened the box. You." Ethan pointed at the sedan. "And you expect me to get in your car?" "It's the only way to the anchor," Delta stated, ignoring the absurdity of the question. "The anchor is the singular point of absolute temporal stability, the center of the key symbol. It is the one place where J. Vance's bleeding, unstable reality cannot touch you." Suddenly, the air filled with a sound that made Ethan's teeth ache, a low, humming frequency that vibrated through the bridge's concrete. The streetlights above them began to flicker violently, cycling between the harsh modern LEDs and the soft, sputtering glow of gas lamps. Ethan looked towards the town's main square, visible past the car. The street itself seemed to shimmer. He saw the modern post office building briefly dissolve into a brick-and-mortar storefront advertising, Vance's Electrical Goods, EST 1946, before snapping back to the present. The Chronos fracture was accelerating. "He's close," Agent Delta muttered, reaching under her seat. She pulled out a bizarre, antique-looking energy pistol, bronze and silver, covered in wires and glass bulbs. "We don't have time for your existential crisis. Get in." Ethan noticed a detail he missed before, a small, almost invisible scar tracing the shape of the geometric eye in the broken circle, the locus key, on the back of Delta's left hand. "You have the key on your hand," Ethan realized. "You know where the anchor is." "Where is it?" "The anchor isn't a place, it's an object," Delta hissed, aiming the weapon at the dark woods where Vance had disappeared. "And it's moving. It always moves when the loop opens. Now, move." Before Ethan could react, the sedan's back window exploded inward with the sound of breaking glass and a concussive blast of compressed air. A large, dark shape landed in the back seat. That it was J. Vance. He was faster, more agile than before, and his face was no longer just smiling, it was distorted, the skin stretched thin, the eyes wide and milky white. He had partially bled into his phantom reality. "The key does not belong to your handlers, Jesse." Vance shrieked, his voice splitting between a rasp and a ghostly echo. He lunged over the seat, his outstretched hand reaching for Delta's scarred hand. Delta fired the energy pistol. It didn't make a sound, only a searing flash of intense, burning blue light. The blast hit Vance square in the chest. Vance was thrown back against the passenger side door, but he didn't bleed. He didn't even burn. The blue energy hit him and dissipated, leaving a swirling, faint sepia stain on the inside of the car door. He was phasing in and out of the timeline. You can't erase a ghost of the self, Delta. Vance snarled, scrambling back into the fight. I am the memory of the fracture. Ethan saw his chance. He scrambled around the front of the car, the chronometer hot in his pocket. He didn't run back to the woods. He ran into the town. He ran straight for the largest remaining structure from the Echo Creek Foundation's era, the decommissioned municipal water tower at the edge of the square. It was old, bolted steel, covered in rust and moss. As he ran, the device in his pocket began vibrating again. The silent, synthesized feminine voice returned, now stronger, overriding the terrifying reality around him. The key is the eye, Ethan. The eye is the center. Look for the blind spot where the history was forgotten. Ethan reached the base of the water tower. He looked up, heart hammering. The structure was a huge, cylindrical steel drum. He scanned the rivets, the joints, the faded town logo, then he saw it, near the base of one of the massive support beams. The steel was newer, cleaner. And etched into the concrete foundation was a single, deep, almost vandalistic carving, the geometric symbol of the eye in the broken circle. The locus key. He ran his fingers over the carving. A small section of the concrete near the symbol gave way with a puff of dust. Behind him, he heard the screech of tires and a sound like a wet sack hitting pavement. Delta's car was moving, and the fight was spilling out. Ethan ignored it. He reached into the small concrete niche. His fingers closed around something hard, cold, and metallic. He pulled it out, a thick, tarnished brass key, about 6 inches long, with a large, elaborate circular head. It was heavy, ancient, and emanating a faint, humming vibration that matched the device in his pocket. As he held the key, the world around him paused, the flickering of the lights stopped. The sound of the chase behind him vanished. He looked down at the brass key, and the symbol on its head, the locus key, began to glow with a steady, protective, warm white light. He looked up at the water tower. The cylindrical drum above him was no longer a water tower. It was the same granite building he'd been in hours ago, the old museum, but pristine, new, exactly as it looked in 1947. He had stepped fully into the heart of the anomaly. A deep, commanding voice boomed from the sky above the tower, amplified and distorted. The anchor is secured. Collapse initiation, 7 minutes. Ethan was standing in a street that didn't exist, holding a key that shouldn't work. The game had just changed from survival to a desperate race against a collapsing timeline. The roar of the countdown, amplified and echoing off the phantom granite walls of the 1947 museum structure, snapped Ethan into action. He was standing on a road that existed outside of time, locked inside the fixed loop that Agent Delta had spoken of. He looked down at the brass key. The locus key. Its circular head, carved with the eye in the broken circle, pulsed with a calm, white light, offering a bizarre sense of stability amidst the temporal chaos. The moment he touched the key, the black chronometer in his pocket began vibrating again. This time, the synthesized voice wasn't faint, it was a clear, urgent whisper, like a direct communication link. The anchor is the counterweight, Ethan. The key is only the way in. When the loop collapses, everything non-fixed gets erased. You have 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Who are you? Ethan demanded, his voice echoing in the uncanny silence. My name doesn't matter. I am the system's failsafe. I was created by Silas Vance to warn the next iteration when the loop was opened. I am the warning itself. Ethan looked back toward the real bridge. The 1950s sedan was still there, but Agent Delta and J. Vance were gone, presumably locked in a confrontation somewhere outside this temporary fixed loop. He was alone, standing on a street where the past and present were struggling for dominance. He quickly examined his immediate surroundings. The water tower had transformed into the museum's back entrance, a heavy oak door reinforced with thick iron bands. This must be the original entrance to the lab, the source of the Chronos fracture. The anchor, Ethan whispered, clutching the brass key. Where is the anchor? And what is it? The anchor is inside. It is the original, stable Kronos prototype. The one that was never meant to be activated. Silas Vance hid it behind the blind spot, a place that was destroyed and therefore forgotten by both timelines. The museum was the building that suffered the electrical fire in the current timeline, destroying a third of its collection. That must be the blind spot. The destroyed wing, Ethan realized, looking at the back of the building. The part that burned 15 years ago. He lunged for the oak door, inserted the large brass locus key into the lock, and turned it. It moved with a satisfying, ancient clunk that he pushed the door open. Inside was not the dusty, modern basement he knew, but a functional, brightly lit research corridor from the 1940s. The air smelled of phenol and machine oil. On the walls hung framed portraits of stern-looking scientists, all wearing the same expression of unsettling, fixed intensity. He ran down the corridor, the chronometer voice counting down in his ear, 5 minutes and 20 seconds. He reached a junction where a large section of the ceiling was charred black, the blind spot. Here, the 1947 reality was weak. The floor was covered in dust and debris from the future fire. A jagged hole opened into a lower chamber, smelling of the ozone and mildew he recognized from the current timeline's museum basement. He leaped through the hole, landing hard in the deeper sub-basement. This chamber was different from the archival area. It was a single, circular room, and in the center, mounted on a pedestal made of black, volcanic-looking stone, was the anchor. It was a machine, massive and intricate, nothing like the shoebox-sized chronometer. It was a perfect sphere of polished silver, roughly the size of a bowling ball, crisscrossed with delicate, glowing blue circuitry. It pulsed gently, creating a low, soothing hum that seemed to anchor the chaos, but the anchor was not alone. Standing before the pedestal was J. Vance. He was still wearing the ill-fitting suit, but his body was now a shimmering, unstable mirage of sepia and color. He was holding something, a heavy, antique metal tool, like a wrench. The anchor, Vance snarled, turning to face Ethan, his voice now a chorus of overlapping whispers. The beginning and the end. If I destroy it, the loop can never be reset. The fracture becomes reality. And I, the ghost, become flesh. Ethan looked at the chronometer in his hand. 4 minutes. Vance, stop. Ethan shouted, taking a step forward. This will kill everyone. The timelines will merge and collapse. Kill them? Vance laughed, a dry, hacking sound. No, Cole. It sets them right. My father's mistakes, your original mistakes, will be erased. The fracture makes me real. And you the variable, you are simply unmade. Vance raised the wrench, preparing to smash the silver sphere. At that exact moment, a blue energy beam lanced out from the hole in the ceiling, hitting Vance in the shoulder. Agent Delta dropped into the room, landing in a crouch, her heavy glasses fogged with dust. She was bruised, her suit torn, but the antique energy pistol was steady in her hand. J. Vance is a fixed point of instability. You cannot merge with the anchor and survive, Delta barked, addressing the anomaly. We will terminate the variable, and the fracture ends. She looked at Ethan, her gaze sharp and ruthless. Cole, the key. There must be a lock. Ethan looked down at the pedestal holding the anchor. Sure enough, below the silver sphere, hidden by shadow, was a small, ornate keyhole. 3 minutes and 15 seconds. Vance shrieked, charging Delta. Delta fired again, but Vance, flickering and phasing, moved too fast. The shots went wide. You won't kill the past, Delta. Vance screamed, tackling her, the wrench clattering across the floor. Ethan ignored the fight. He scrambled forward, the white light of the locus key illuminating the dark room. He found the keyhole and pushed the brass key in. That it didn't turn. It's the wrong frequency, the chronometer voice whispered desperately. The key is set to 1947. You need to force it to resonate with the current timeline. Delta cried out as Vance pinned her, his blurred, sepia-toned face inches from hers. "Give me the device, Cole." We reset the loop together. Ethan looked at the black chronometer. It was the device he found in the modern bin. It was a part of his reality that he held the chronometer up to the key, touching the small, dark lens against the large, circular head of the brass key that a blinding flash erupted, not blue, not red, but a pure, violent violet. The brass key shuddered, the white light intensifying, and Ethan heard the gears of time grind. The anchor sphere hummed into a painful crescendo. Ethan tried the key again. This time, it turned with a smooth, decisive thwack. The moment the locus key locked, the silver sphere of the anchor pulsed with a final, brilliant blue light. The countdown voice in Ethan's ear changed, becoming triumphant and terrible. Anchor engaged. Variable deletion sequence initiated. Ethan looked up. Vance had recoiled from Delta, clutching his head, screaming as his body began to pixelate, like a photograph being shredded. "No. No, father's mistake. I am real. I am our dash." Vance dissolved completely into a cloud of reddish-brown dust, the same dust Ethan found in his cabin. Agent Delta stared at the empty space, her body slumping with exhausted relief. "It's done," she breathed, picking up her weapon. "The variable is gone. The loop is fixed." Ethan, still holding the locus key, looked from the empty space to Delta. "Vance is gone." But the voice said, "Variable deletion sequence initiated. I am the variable, Delta. I am still here." Delta looked at him, her expression hardening again, the moment of relief passing. She raised the energy pistol, aiming it directly at Ethan's chest. "You activated the anchor," she said, her voice completely flat. "But you used the locus key. You opened the only door that leads to the true anchor, the one inside the machine. Now, you must fulfill your function, Mr. Cole." "The anchor is not the sphere, Ethan," the voice from the chronometer whispered, no longer a warning, but a desperate plea. "The anchor is the person who controls the key. And you are about to be consumed by it." The small, circular chamber was quiet, save for the rhythmic, low thrumming of the silver sphere on the pedestal. The device Agent Delta called the anchor. The reddish-brown dust that was Vance had settled, coating the floor like a gruesome patina. Ethan still held the locus key, its brass surface cool and the circular head glowing a calming white. He stared down the barrel of Agent Delta's strange, antique energy pistol. "The anchor is not the sphere," Ethan repeated, quoting the warning voice, his heart sinking with the terrible realization. "Then what is it? And what is my function?" Agent Delta lowered her weapon slightly, her lips barely moving beneath the severity of her thick glasses. Her expression was one of cold, professional finality. "The silver sphere is merely the stabilizer. It creates the fixed loop and maintains the localized timeline. The anchor is the energy source, the consciousness that powers the loop and holds the reality of Echo Creek together, preventing it from unraveling into the temporal void." She took a step closer. When Dr. Silas Vance engineered this system in 1947, he realized that a machine alone could not anchor a subjective reality. It requires a sentient consciousness to feed it a constant, personal now. He needed a volunteer. "And you were the volunteer?" Ethan asked, desperately trying to keep her talking, his mind racing for an escape. Delta gave a fleeting, humorless twitch of her lips. "No. Silas Vance tried to use his son, Jesse. But Jesse Vance resisted. That resistance caused the original fracture and created the anomaly, Vance. It took the resources of the Foundation, our organization, to contain the damage. We terminated Silas and sealed the loop. But we still needed a replacement." She gestured at the locus key in Ethan's hand. "The key doesn't unlock the stabilizer. It unlocks the succession protocol. By forcing the 1947 key and the modern chronometer together, you didn't just delete Vance, you synchronized yourself with the system's requirements. You are the perfect chronological match for the original variable, Jesse Vance. You are now the designated successor. You are the anchor." Ethan felt a dreadful pull, a buzzing sensation, as the white light of the key grew stronger. "No. I won't do it." "You have no choice," Delta said, raising her weapon again. "The deletion sequence is irreversible. The loop is now drawing on your consciousness. You have 30 seconds before the system fully integrates you. You will be absorbed into the stabilizer, becoming a pure, now, the fixed point of Echo Creek, forever holding this 1 square mile of reality together." "Ethan, listen to me." The synthesized voice screamed from the chronometer, its pitch spiking with distress. "The key is the eye, but the eye is broken. The flaw in the design is the consciousness. You can fight the sink. The chronometer is the key to your current reality. Use the reality bleed." Ethan gripped the chronometer and the locus key together, the violet flash returning, momentarily blinding Agent Delta. Delta yelled, "Stop resisting. You'll tear the loop apart." "I need to break the sink," Ethan shouted. He looked down at the pedestal, seeing the fine layer of Vance's dust. Vance had resisted the absorption and escaped, but he had left something behind. The metallic wrench Vance had used to attack Delta was lying on the floor. If the consciousness is the source, then the source can be polluted, Ethan realized. He dropped the locus key into the keyhole and lunged for the wrench. Delta fired the energy pistol. The blue blast grazed Ethan's arm, a searing, electrical burn that threw him against the wall. He gasped, dropping the chronometer, but his fingers found the wrench. The anchor's humming was now a deafening, high-pitched whine. The silver sphere was starting to pull, not just at the air, but at Ethan's very memories. He saw flashes of his childhood, his parents' faces, his first camera, all being digitized, catalogued, and pulled toward the silver sphere. Delta ran forward, snatching the black chronometer off the floor. "The failsafe is disabled," she declared, crushing the small device under her heel. The synthesized voice let out a final, brief, horrific gurgle of static and was gone. "Now, submit," Delta commanded, pointing the pistol at Ethan's head. Ethan ignored her. He looked at the silver sphere, now glowing with internal, pulsating energy. He raised the heavy wrench. "The anchor needs a pure consciousness to function." Ethan roared, using the last of his strength, driven by the memory of Vance's dust and the warning. With a primal scream, Ethan brought the wrench down, not on the stabilizer, but on the pedestal, the black, volcanic stone base. He smashed it repeatedly, until the stone was cracked, and a thin, yellowish fluid began to seep out. The fluid hit the layer of Vance's reddish-brown dust that a terrifying reaction occurred. The dust ignited in a burst of greenish sepia light, and the swirling cloud of Vance's remains was sucked instantly into the crack in the pedestal. The stabilizer sphere's high-pitched whine immediately dropped to a low, ragged groan. The soothing hum was replaced by a sputtering sound, like a broken tape loop. Delta froze, aghast. "What did you do?" "The variable, you contaminated the anchor with the fixed-point residue." The room was plunged into darkness as the stabilizer's blue lights died. The only illumination was the faint, sickly glow of the locus key still embedded in the pedestal. The anchor, now polluted by the consciousness of the resistant, failed variable, was short-circuiting. The silence returned, even thicker than before. Then, a new sound, a wet, rhythmic thumping coming from inside the silver sphere. The sphere was visibly bulging and contracting, the beautiful silver shell now marred by dark, vein-like fissures that glowed with a sickly, pulsing red. Delta, her professional composure finally shattering, screamed, "He's integrating the contamination. The loop is tearing itself inside out." She turned and fired wildly at the sphere, but the blue energy blasts were swallowed by the expanding red veins. Ethan knew he had done something horrifyingly right. He didn't just stop the anchor, he corrupted it, turning the stabilizing machine into a chaotic vessel for the ghost of Jesse Vance. "If the loop is tearing," Ethan gasped, pulling the locus key from the pedestal, "then the door is open." He turned and scrambled back through the hole in the ceiling, leaving Agent Delta screaming and firing uselessly at the grotesquely pulsating anchor. He was back in the dust-filled museum basement of the present day, surrounded by moldy boxes and the smell of mildew. The transition was violent, a brief, jarring jump, but something was wrong. The basement wasn't empty. Standing among the salvage crates were 4 figures, indistinct and hazy, wearing the same fedoras and double-breasted suits as the specter in his first photograph. They were silent, featureless, but they were no longer transparent. They were solid, real, and moving towards him. They were the fixed points of the old loop, now materialized by the chaotic energy of the corrupted anchor. As the figures advanced, the sound of the collapsing anchor, a deep, resonant gong, came from the chamber below, followed by an unnerving silence. Ethan looked at the locus key in his hand. The white light was gone. It was just a heavy piece of brass. The 4 figures raised their hands, their movements synchronized and robotic. Ethan had nowhere to go. Then, from the darkness of the main archival hallway, a sudden, blinding flash of white light exploded, followed by a violent, concussive crack. The light was not a weapon. It was a massive, high-powered camera flash. All 4 figures staggered, momentarily frozen and thrown off balance by the visual assault. A voice, surprisingly ordinary and breathless, called out from the dark. "I told you I just needed to take the pictures, Cole. Move it." It was the museum's security guard, a middle-aged woman Ethan had only met once, who clearly knew exactly what was happening. She stood there, holding a massive, 1980s-era professional studio flash unit, which she quickly armed for a second blast. "Follow me," she yelled, "the fracture point is closing." The massive flash from the security guard's antiquated camera unit bought Ethan a critical 3 seconds. The 4 materialized, fixed points, the sepia-toned entities, staggered back, their featureless faces momentarily blinded. "The loading dock," the guard shouted, charging past the frozen figures. "Now." Ethan didn't hesitate. He clutched the brass locus key and followed her, sprinting down the dusty, cluttered corridor. He risked a glance behind him. The fixed points were recovering, turning their vacant gazes towards the sound of the running. The guard, a stout woman named Brenda, moved with surprising speed. She didn't fumble with keys or security codes. She simply slammed her shoulder against a steel utility door marked "Loading," and it burst open with a squeal of rusted hinges. They tumbled out into the crisp night air, landing near the museum's forgotten, overgrown loading bay. "My truck!" Brenda panted, pointing a trembling finger toward a battered, camouflage-painted pickup truck parked carelessly near a thicket of weeping willows. "Get in. And keep that chunk of brass away from the ignition." Ethan scrambled into the passenger seat as Brenda wrenched the key into the ignition. The truck roared to life, tires spitting gravel as she threw it into reverse, peeling away from the museum. As they sped down the winding, unlit back road leading out of Echo Creek, Ethan looked in the rearview mirror. The museum building, the old granite structure, was shimmering violently, its silhouette cycling rapidly between its current dilapidated state and the clean, bright facade of the 1947 Foundation building. "It's a complete temporal collapse now," Brenda said, her eyes fixed on the road. "You contaminated the anchor, didn't you?" "I introduced the residue of J. Vance," Ethan confirmed, still reeling. "How do you know that? Who are you?" Brenda gripped the wheel tighter, her knuckles white. "I'm the one who monitors the system's fallout. Every chrono stabilizer needs an archival agent. I was the archival agent for Echo Creek. My job was simple: document the fixed loop, clean up minor instabilities, and ensure no unauthorized variable ever got near the prototype. Clearly, I failed the last part. You work for Agent Delta's organization." "I work against them," she spat. "Delta works for the Department of Temporal Acquisition and Restoration, DTR. They view the chrono stabilizers as temporal dams, artificial, fixed points used to manage localized reality. They don't restore history, they enforce it. They want a neat, clean reality, even if it's a lie." She reached over and pulled a heavy, leather-bound journal from the dashboard, handing it to Ethan. "I'm an archivist. We believe the fracture, the truth of the instability, must be recorded, not erased. That journal is a copy of Silas Vance's final log, the real one, not the sanitized records DTR kept." Ethan opened the journal. The first page was dated 1947, written in a cramped, frantic hand. the consciousness is too unstable. The subject resisted integration. The loop will not fix. It requires a neutral mind, a blank slate that exists outside the Foundation's direct influence. The key will find the next iteration. Jesse Vance wasn't an anomaly, he was the first failed anchor, Brenda continued, turning a corner sharply. When the anchor failed to integrate him, the system created the warning voice, the failsafe you heard. But DTR shut it down and silenced the warning. They're running a cleanup operation now, led by that Viper, Delta. Suddenly, the truck's radio crackled to life, overriding the static with a cold, synthesized voice, Archival Agent Brenda Crosby. You are in violation of Temporal Reduction Protocol 7. Return the variable, Ethan Cole, and the locus key to the nearest isolation zone. Too late, Delta, Brenda muttered, pushing the gas pedal to the floor. We're past the municipal limits. The fracture is loose. What happens now? Ethan asked, looking down at the locus key. It was completely inert, cold metal. The anchor is poisoned with Vance's fear and instability, Brenda explained, glancing at him with a desperate intensity. Instead of a stable fixed loop, Echo Creek is now a Chronos echo chamber. The past isn't just merging with the present, it's duplicating, mirroring, and collapsing inward. As she spoke, they passed a small, reflective roadside monument, a polished slab of granite with a bronze plaque commemorating the town's founding. As they flew past it, the monument momentarily doubled. Ethan saw two identical granite slabs, two identical bronze plaques, perfectly overlapping for a heartbeat before snapping back to one. But on the single plaque, the date had changed. It no longer read, Echo Creek, founded 1888. It now read, Echo Creek, founded 1947. It's not just objects, Brenda whispered, slowing the truck slightly. Look. Ahead of them, walking slowly down the center of the road, was a figure. A tall man in a dark, slightly tattered suit. Vance, Ethan breathed, recognizing the silhouette, but as the truck got closer, they saw that this man wasn't the violent anomaly, J. Vance. This man was slightly older, his suit neatly pressed, his expression tired and bewildered. He was carrying a small, leather briefcase, and he looked lost. That's Jesse Vance, the original variable, Brenda said, her voice strained. The one who resisted the first integration. The anchor's pollution is throwing up random echoes of fixed points. Before Brenda could break, a second figure appeared, a perfect, mirror image of the man with the briefcase, walking from the opposite direction. Then a third, and a fourth. In moments, the road was crowded with 24 identical, somber men in dark suits, all Jesse Vances, all moving with the same bewildered gait, their eyes wide and lost, converging on the bridge they had just crossed. The echo chamber, Brenda whispered. The timeline is duplicating reality over itself. And they're heading back to the point of origin. She swerved the truck around the multitude of Vances, tires screeching. Ethan looked back. The 24 Vances stopped and began staring at the back of the truck, their faces coalescing into one massive, unsettling, multiplied stare. We need to find the man who synchronized the locus key with the stabilizer's original frequency, Brenda insisted. The real Silas Vance. He must have a secondary anchor, a final failsafe outside of TAR's control. Silas Vance is dead, Ethan countered. Delta said they terminated him. Brenda shook her head, her gaze shifting to the dense forest flanking the road. In a Chronos echo chamber, Mr. Cole, terminated only means they became another, more permanent fixed point. I know where they sealed him. It's an old copper mine, deep in the hills. The blind spot he left behind. If we find his body, we might find the truth. Brenda drove the battered truck deep into the higher Appalachian foothills, turning off the main road onto a logging trail so overgrown it barely qualified as a path. The air grew colder, and the dense pine forest muffled the sounds of the collapsing reality they had just fled. The old copper kettle mine, Brenda explained, navigating a rutted, muddy incline. It's been sealed for 50 years. Silas Vance used it as a backup research site. DTR sealed his body inside when they terminated him. They thought it would contain his influence, turning him into a fixed, dead secret. Ethan gripped the brass locus key, which remained cold and lifeless. The chaos from the chronometer's demise still rattled his nerves. Why would they leave a fixed point of a scientist who engineered the system? Isn't that dangerous? Precisely, Brenda replied, her eyes scanning the dark woods. DTR is arrogant. They believe they can manage history. They sealed him in a deep vein of copper ore. Copper is a natural insulator against temporal resonance. They thought he'd stay dead and stable. They were wrong. She braked the truck abruptly next to a steep, rocky outcropping. The mine entrance was a dark, square maw, crudely sealed by a cinder block wall and a rusted iron door, both covered in moss and years of neglect. "We go in here," Brenda stated, grabbing a heavy-duty miner's lamp from behind her seat. "And what if we run into Delta?" Ethan asked. "Delta's team is busy trying to clean up the mess at the museum," Brenda scoffed, handing Ethan a spare lamp. "They're fighting a legion of bewildered Jesse Vances. They won't look for us here yet. This is an old secret." They pried the iron door open, the sound of scraping metal echoing down the shaft. Inside, the air was immediately colder, metallic, and heavy with the scent of wet stone. They descended into the mine, their headlamps cutting through the absolute darkness. The tunnels were narrow, slippery, and reinforced with ancient, creaking timber supports. As they walked, the silence of the mine was suddenly broken by a faint, metallic clanging from the darkness ahead. "We're not alone," Ethan whispered. "Fixed points," Brenda corrected, adjusting her grip on a heavy flashlight, using it as a makeshift club. Silas Vance had personnel here. When the anchor broke, their fixed realities materialized here, where they died. But they won't be like the Jesse Vances. These will be aggressive. They rounded a corner and saw the source of the noise. Standing at the end of the tunnel was a miner, dressed in vintage canvas overalls and a heavy helmet, swinging a pickaxe into the solid rock face in a slow, monotonous rhythm. The sound was horribly unnatural, too regular to be real. As the light hit him, the miner stopped. He slowly lowered the pickaxe and turned his head. Like the figures at the museum, his face was smooth and featureless, devoid of eyes, nose, or mouth, a terrifying blank slate. The miner didn't walk towards them. He phased in an instant. The miner was gone from the end of the tunnel and had materialized right in front of them, his pickaxe raised high. His form seemed to shimmer at the edges, existing slightly out of phase with the light. "He's a close proximity point," Brenda gasped, shoving Ethan back. "He can't move through space, only through the now." Brenda slammed her flashlight club into the miner's chest. The impact sounded like striking concrete, and the miner didn't flinch. Ethan ducked under the descending pickaxe and scrambled backward. He noticed the locus key in his hand begin to vibrate faintly. "The key is an amplifier. Hold it near the fixed source." The memory of the chronometer's voice echoed in his mind, a ghost of a warning. Ethan aimed the key towards the miner's blank face. The brass key emitted a pulse of low-frequency sound that only Ethan could hear. The miner stopped his attack. He lowered his pickaxe, and the blank slate of his face twitched, as if trying to form a mouth. A dry, choking whisper came from the figure, a sound of profound fatigue. The noise, the constant now." The miner stumbled back, clutching his featureless head, his form momentarily flickering back to a transparent, sepia-toned specter. The key was overwhelming his static, fixed reality. The key is overriding his sequence. Brenda realized, leveling her light at the miner. It's pulling him back to the moment of his termination. Taking advantage of the disruption, they sprinted past the miner, who was now dissolving back into the tunnel wall with a final, heartbreaking clanging of the pickaxe striking stone. They ran deeper until the tunnels widened into a natural cavern. In the center was a small, crudely built copper coffin, resting on a bed of raw copper ore. "Silas Vance," Brenda whispered. The coffin was secured with heavy chains and a thick, ornate padlock, a lock with a keyhole identical to the one on the anchor's pedestal. The locust key, Ethan realized, his hand already rising. The anchor required a stable point of origin. Silas Vance had himself buried with the secondary anchor to maintain the loop, not destroy it. He inserted the brass key into the padlock. This time, there was no resistance. The lock clicked open instantly. Brenda used her lamp to illuminate the coffin. Together, they pushed the heavy copper lid aside. Inside, resting on a bed of crystallized copper and old fabric, was a skeleton. But it was not a conventional skeleton. The bone structure was warped, elongated, and seemed to be composed of countless tiny, fragmented pieces, constantly shifting and clicking against each other. It was a skeleton struggling to maintain its form, and clutched in its hand was the secondary anchor. It was a large, intricate pocket watch, crafted from the same matte black metal as the chronometer. It was running silently, its hands spinning at a blur, marking every tick of 1,000 possible moments simultaneously. As Ethan reached for the watch, the air in the cavern became thick and oppressive. A voice boomed, deep and terrifying, not from the skeleton, but from everywhere at once. The anchor endures. The loop must be closed. The corpse's hand, the skeletal fingers clutching the watch, suddenly snapped shut, gripping the pocket watch tighter than any living muscle could. The distorted skeletal head slowly turned towards them. From the place where the eye sockets should have been, a low, red light began to glow. Silas Vance was no longer a fixed point. He was the perpetual now. The cavern vibrated with the deep, booming voice emanating from the copper coffin. Silas Vance, the skeleton, was not a ghost or a zombie, he was a horrifying manifestation of absolute temporal stability. His remains, preserved and saturated by the copper's insulating properties, had become a perpetual now, a single, unmoving point of consciousness trapped between life and death, desperately holding the secondary anchor. Ethan recoiled as the skeletal hand tightened its grip on the black pocket watch. The red light glowing in the eye sockets pulsed, a silent, terrible warning. "He's not alive," Brenda whispered, fear etched on her face. "He's a pure, self-aware fixed point. His consciousness is integrated into the secondary anchor, the watch. He's actively fighting the contamination you introduced into the primary stabilizer." Ethan looked down at his own hand. The locust key, still clutched in his grasp, now pulsed a sickly orange, a danger signal. "The watch," Ethan said, forcing his voice steady. "If the primary stabilizer is poisoned, we need to activate the secondary anchor to re-establish a loop." "The loop is perfect as it is," Silas Vance's amplified voice boomed, rattling the cavern walls. "Fixed. Stable. You are the variable, the invasive seed from the future. You will be unmade, just as my fool son was unmade." The skeleton segmented, shifting fingers slowly extended towards Ethan. As they moved, a wave of profound inertia washed over Ethan, a physical resistance to change. His joints seized up, his muscles locked. It was the feeling of being held in place by the crushing weight of an unchangeable past. Brenda gasped and fell to her knees, clutching her chest. "He's forcing our now into his now. We're freezing." Ethan fought the paralysis, his body screaming in protest. He could move his hand barely an inch, but he managed to force the orange pulsing locust key toward the skeleton. The moment the key came within a foot of the copper coffin, the key's orange light flared into a brilliant red. A high-pitched, retaliatory screech erupted from the key, a sound of temporal dissonance. Silas Vance's skeleton convulsed. The warped bones shivered, and the red light in the eye sockets flickered, momentarily receding into darkness. The crush of inertia on Ethan lifted slightly. "The locust key is meant to access the anchor, not fight it," Brenda explained, struggling to rise. "But your synchronization with the poison primary stabilizer has turned the key into a temporal resonance disruptor. It destabilizes his fixed point." Ethan used the momentary break to swing the key hard, aiming for the skeleton's hand. The grip on the pocket watch, the brass of the key hit the warped bone with a dry, cracking thwack. The bone didn't break, but the impact sent a visible, chaotic ripple across the skeleton's structure. "Stop. You violate the locus." Silas Vance's voice bellowed, laced with pain. The skeleton's other hand shot out, moving at impossible speed, and slammed the copper coffin lid shut. Crash. Ethan and Brenda were momentarily blinded by sparks and dust. When they cleared, the lid was back in place, and the heavy chains had instantly recoiled around the copper box, locked tight by the locust key's own temporal lock. The entire structure was vibrating violently, Silas Vance's trapped consciousness struggling to escape. He sealed himself back in. Brenda shouted, scrambling away from the vibrating coffin. He's fighting to maintain stability, but the key is breaking his fix. We have to get out of the copper field now. They stumbled back up the slippery tunnel, illuminated by their bouncing headlamps. They knew that the entire mine, saturated with copper, was a massive echo chamber for Silas Vance's corrupted stability. They burst out of the iron door and into the night air. The cold wind was a welcome shock, but the air felt charged, metallic. Brenda pointed to the logging trail. The truck. We need to get down the mountain, fast. As they ran towards the truck, a sudden, blinding flash of light erupted from the sky above the mine entrance, not electrical, but a cold, clean burst of white. A loud, synthesized voice cut through the air, overriding the natural sounds of the forest. Agent Delta 2 Archival Agent Crosby. The primary stabilizer is in critical condition. DTAR has established a perimeter. Surrender the variable, Ethan Cole, and the secondary anchor is terminated. Brenda stopped dead in her tracks, staring up. A sleek, matte black helicopter, unlike any model Ethan recognized, silent and angular, hovered high above the tree line. She knew we'd come here, Brenda hissed, pulling Ethan behind a thick spruce tree. Delta's organization, DTR, is prepared for Silas Vance's resistance. They're threatening to detonate the secondary anchor, to destroy the watch and Silas, to force us out. If they destroy the watch, does that fix the loop? Ethan asked. It eliminates the last chance for stability, Brenda replied grimly. If the secondary anchor is destroyed, the poisoned primary stabilizer takes over. We go from a localized collapse to a catastrophic universal Chronos event, the full, global merger of the present and the 1947 fixed loop. Suddenly, a blinding beam of light from the helicopter swept down and locked onto their position. They're deploying assets. Brenda yelled. We run. Head for the gorge. The river is the only way out of the perimeter. They broke cover and sprinted for the truck, but they were too late. 3 figures dropped from the helicopter on rappelling lines. They were clad in black, featureless, high-tech tactical gear, and each carried the same bronze and silver energy pistol as Agent Delta. They were the DTR acquisition team. The lead operative hit the ground, raised their pistol, and fired. The blue energy beam didn't aim for them, but for the truck's engine block. The truck exploded in a flash of heat and shrapnel. Utterly disabled, Brenda shoved Ethan towards a dark ravine. Go. Now. Get off this mountain. Take the locust key and find the one place DTR can never touch. Where is that? Ethan demanded, sliding down the steep, rocky slope. The place where the loop started. Brenda screamed, turning to fire her own heavy-duty flash unit, aiming to blind the DTR agents. The one place Silas Vance failed to anchor. The place he called the Chronos Null Zone. Ethan scrambled down the ravine, the sound of energy pistols firing behind him and Brenda's last, desperate shouts echoing in the night. He was alone, falling into the dark, with only a dead brass key and the knowledge that the fate of 2 timelines rested in his hands. Ethan tumbled down the rocky ravine, the locust key digging painfully into his palm. The crash of the disabled truck and the sharp, echoing reports of the DTR agent's energy pistols faded quickly as he plunged deeper into the wilderness. That he landed hard at the bottom, bruised but intact, next to a churning, icy mountain stream. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the throbbing pain in his shoulder, and ran along the bank, putting distance between himself and the DTR perimeter. The Chronos Null Zone. Brenda's final instruction echoed in his head, the place where the loop started. The one place Silas Vance failed to anchor. Ethan searched his memory, recalling the fractured information from Silas Vance's log and Delta's explanation. The Chronos fracture began in the museum basement when Jesse Vance resisted the integration in 1947. Where was Jesse Vance before he went to the lab? He pulled out the only remaining piece of evidence he had, the heavy, leather-bound journal Brenda had given him. He used the faint, diffuse moonlight to scan the frantic, cramped handwriting that he found an entry from late 1947, Jesse's anxiety is extreme. He claims the stabilizer is feeding on his awareness of self. He hides his anxieties in the old cemetery, the one on the rise overlooking the town, near the unmarked plots. He calls it his refuge of stillness. I fear his consciousness is already too scattered for the integration to be successful. The old cemetery. The one place in Echo Creek where people go to be permanently fixed in time, death. It was the only place Silas Vance would have intentionally avoided anchoring, as it was already a potent, natural fixed point. Ethan oriented himself using the stars and the distant glow of Echo Creek. The cemetery was on the highest hill on the town's eastern edge, opposite the museum. It was a long, brutal run, but it was his only option. As he ran, the reality around him continued to fluctuate violently. He noticed that the shadows of the trees were duplicating, slightly out of phase, like a photographic double exposure. The air smelled briefly of pine, then ozone, then suddenly, overwhelmingly, of coal smoke, the smell of 1947 Echo Creek. That he was running through a timeline that was actively tearing itself apart. Finally, he stumbled out of the woods and onto the grounds of the old cemetery. It was a desolate, overgrown place, filled with tilting granite headstones and black wrought iron fences that looked 1,000 years old. The sense of stillness here was profound, a silence that felt heavier than the quiet of the woods that he found the rise overlooking the town. From this vantage point, he could see the entire valley. The view was jarringly inconsistent. The modern streetlights flickered against the dim glow of what appeared to be gas lamps. The distant museum building flashed between granite and concrete. He looked for the unmarked plots. Near the back wall of the cemetery, underneath a massive, dead oak tree, the grass was yellowed and sparse. No headstones, no markers, just barren earth. As he approached the spot, the locust key in his hand suddenly shuddered and began to pulse with a low, deep purple light. The color was new, menacing, and utterly magnetic. He reached the bare earth. The purple light intensified, and the key began to hum so loudly it was painful. He knelt and plunged the key into the ground. Zzzzzzzzzt. The key acted like a probe, conducting the purple energy into the earth. The ground around the key began to glow faintly with the same light, illuminating a flat, almost perfectly circular area of earth about 10 feet in diameter. He had found the Chronos null zone. A massive wave of dizziness hit him, far worse than the vertigo he'd felt in the basement. This wasn't just physical, it was sensory overload. Ethan didn't just see the past, he felt it. He felt the cold earth pressing down on a shallow grave. He felt the crushing anxiety of Jesse Vance, the original variable, trying to escape his assigned fate. He felt the desperate hope of Silas Vance, trying to use this refuge of stillness as his final, unanchored experimental site. Then, a new presence emerged from the center of the null zone, a shimmering, vertical rectangle of sepia light, like a door to a dusty old film reel. Stepping out of the light was Agent Delta, but she was different. Her glasses were shattered, her severe suit was ripped, and her face was streaked with dirt and blood. She looked exhausted, enraged, and barely anchored to the present. She wasn't alone. Behind her stood two of the featureless DTR acquisition agents, their black armor scarred by energy blasts. The null zone, Delta stated, her voice hoarse and raw. The last place for the loop to bleed. You should have stayed with the archivist, Cole. She would have prolonged your inevitable integration. I will not. She raised her energy pistol. The contaminated anchor is overloading. We must reset the loop here, where the instability first took root. Hand over the locus key. You want to destroy this spot? Ethan demanded. Turn the entire town into a fixed memory. We want to remove the point of failure, Delta corrected, her eyes burning with fanaticism. And you, as the synchronized variable, are the final component of the null zone's original function. She pointed the pistol at him. The null zone was designed by Silas Vance to be a fail-safe reset button, a place where the variable could be completely erased without contaminating the anchor. It uses the temporal stillness of the cemetery to execute a complete consciousness wipe. You were meant to walk in here and vanish, leaving the system clean. Then why did the key lead me here? Because you were programmed to integrate. Delta screamed. Now, give me the key, or I'll shoot it out of your hand and let the null zone take you piece by piece. The DTR agents took a step forward, their pistols humming. Ethan clutched the purple pulsing locus key. He had found the beginning of the end. He knew that if he ran, the DTR would use the key to execute their plan. If he stayed, he would be erased. That he had one last, desperate idea, a play on the very nature of the fixed points. He remembered the multitude of Jesse Vances he had seen. You said the loop is tearing itself apart, Ethan challenged, his voice cracking with exhaustion. You said the past is duplicating. He looked at the DTR agents. They were fixed points, realities enforced by Delta's organization. Let's see just how much this timeline can hold. Ethan took a deep breath, closed his eyes, and with a final, draining surge of energy, he ripped the locus key out of the null zone. The moment the key left the ground, the purple light exploded. But instead of a blast, it was an overwhelming temporal suction. The sepia tone tear behind Agent Delta widened, becoming a gaping maw. But instead of pulling Delta and her agents into the past, it began to vomit forth a cascade of new figures. First, 2 more Jesse Vances, indistinguishable from the others, stepped out. Then, 4 more. Then 6 more, all looking bewildered, all carrying the same antique briefcase, and all wearing the same expression of profound, crushing anxiety. The Chronos null zone was reversing its polarity. Instead of erasing the variable, the temporal distortion was duplicating the primary fixed variable, Jesse Vance. In overwhelming numbers, the ground was instantly flooded with a shuffling, identical, and multiplying crowd of Jesse Vances. They filled the cemetery, pushing against Agent Delta and her 2 remaining agents. Delta screamed, lost in the shuffling sea of her greatest failure. This is not acquisition. This is a bleed. Ethan stumbled away, leaving Delta and the DTR agents struggling against the ceaseless, multiplying wave of their original fixed variable. He knew his escape was temporary. The Chronos syndrome was not just a threat to Echo Creek anymore. It was a self-replicating plague, and he was the carrier. Ethan didn't stop running until he was miles away from the horrifying spectacle of the Chronos null zone. The muffled screams of Agent Delta and the silent, multiplying shuffle of the Jesse Vances were quickly swallowed by the night. He was on the town's outer limits, an old highway that hadn't seen heavy traffic in decades. That he finally collapsed against a concrete retaining wall, catching his breath, the purple-tinged locus key falling from his numb fingers onto the asphalt. That he looked back at Echo Creek. The entire valley was no longer flickering, it was pulsating with a constant, deep violet glow. The temporal bleed was no longer localized. That he knew what was happening. The contaminated primary stabilizer, poisoned by J. Vance's residue, was fighting the resistance of the secondary anchor, Silas Vance's consciousness, while the null zone was perpetually flooding the reality with the original variable, Jesse Vance. The fixed loop had not been reinforced, it had been shattered into an infinite number of identical, conflicting iterations. The universal Chronos event was starting. Suddenly, a massive burst of electrical energy rippled across the sky, momentarily turning the violet glow to a blinding white. The nearby streetlights exploded in showers of sparks. That he heard a new sound, the distinctive, high-pitched whirring of the antique pocket watch, the secondary anchor. It was no longer in the copper coffin, it was flying through the air, propelled by sheer temporal force. The watch landed on the asphalt just inches from his hand, silent again, its hand spinning madly. Silas Vance's consciousness had broken out of the copper mine. Ethan knew this was his last chance for information. He cautiously touched the pocket watch. The moment he made contact, his mind was flooded, not with images, but with pure, cold, logical thought. He heard the deep, commanding voice of Silas Vance, now clear, cold, and utterly desperate. The key has chosen you, iteration Cole. I resisted for decades, maintaining the secondary locus, but your contamination of the primary stabilizer has initiated the cascade. You created this system. Ethan thought back, the mental dialogue instantaneous and terrifyingly clear. How do I stop the cascade? You cannot stop it. You can only finalize it. The stabilizer is compromised. DAR's control is lost. The system requires a true, perfect anchor to absorb the entire bleed, all the Jesse Van Cess, all the fixed points, and the J. Vance residue. And you think I'm that anchor? You are the variable who touched the original prototype. You are the perfect chronological echo of my son. You are the empty vessel needed for the final integration. You must take the key and return to the stabilizer. Ethan stared at the watch. Silas Vance was not offering salvation, he was offering a sacrifice. If I integrate, I cease to be myself. I become the unmoving center of a single moment, holding this lie of a town together for eternity. It is the only way to save the global now, Silas Vance argued, his mental voice devoid of emotion. DAR's goal was always control. My goal was always survival. Now, both goals merge. Only the anchor can stop the universal bleed. Before Ethan could respond, a dark shadow fell over them. Agent Delta, battered and furious, materialized from the darkness. She was alone, her face a mask of primal, focused rage. The old man is lying to you, Cole. Delta shrieked, her voice high and unstable. She was no longer a DTR agent, she was a collapsing personality. The anchor doesn't fix the loop, it just makes a new one. And I am the next in line. She pointed her fractured energy pistol. Silas, you failed. The system chose the variable. But the agent of acquisition claims the key. I will be the anchor. Delta lunged, not for Ethan, but for the pocket watch on the ground. Ethan didn't move. He let her reach for the watch, and as she did, Silas Vance's final, chilling thought resonated in Ethan's mind: she is a fixed point of DAR's ambition. She will fail. The system requires a clean paradox. As Delta's hand closed on the watch, a massive pulse of pure temporal energy erupted from the secondary anchor. The watch didn't explode, it dissolved into a brilliant, ephemeral light, taking Silas Vance's consciousness with it. Delta screamed as the energy surged through her. Her body began to flicker and phase, cycling violently between the modern agent Delta and a young, terrified researcher in a 1950s lab coat, a previously unknown fixed point. No. I am not the fixed point. I am the, with a final, terrible crack, Delta's body vanished. Only a small, charred pile of reddish-brown dust remained, identical to J. Vance's residue. She had failed and been reduced to the fixed point of her own failure. Ethan looked at the dust, then at the locus key in his hand. The key was no longer purple. It was now glowing a magnificent, terrifying rainbow of swirling, chaotic color. It held the power of two anchors, J. Vance's residue, and the Chronos null zone that he was the last anomaly standing, the final element of the plan, the final, paradoxical gambit, crystallized in his mind, placed there by the ghost of Silas Vance, and the final, frantic energy of the Chronos stabilizer. He had to return to the museum basement. He had to become the anchor, but not for Echo Creek's timeline. He raised the glowing locus key to his chest, feeling the terrifying pull of the infinite. He looked back at the town, the violet light consuming the hills. I won't be the stable lie, Ethan whispered to the dying town. I'll be the paradox that saves the now. Ethan turned his back on the glowing, violet-streaked spectacle of Echo Creek, clutching the rainbow-pulsing locus key. The key now contained the residual energy of the two collapsed anchors, Silas Vance's watch and the primary stabilizer, and the contamination of the two failed variables, J. Vance and Agent Delta. He was holding a condensed temporal singularity. He ran back towards the museum, moving with a desperate, paradoxical sense of certainty. He was no longer running from his fate, he was running towards the machine that was designed to erase him. He reached the museum building. It was no longer shimmering, it was frozen, locked in the exact moment of its current dilapidated state, yet saturated with the violet light of the ongoing temporal bleed. The heavy oak door in the back was still ajar. He descended into the basement. The sub-basement chamber was a silent, ruined tomb. The black volcanic pedestal was cracked, and the silver stabilizer sphere lay half-melted and inert on the floor. It was no longer humming, it was whispering, making a soft, terrible sound like 1,000 voices sighing in unison. The air was heavy, thick with the smell of every possible past. Ethan walked to the pedestal. The final memory thought from Silas Vance was his guide: the system requires a clean paradox. He understood now. The system was designed to stabilize time by integrating a consciousness into a fixed point. If the consciousness resisted, it created an anomaly. The fracture.to stopped the universal bleed. He couldn't just become the anchor, he had to break the fundamental rule of the anchor. Ethan knelt beside the broken stabilizer. He reached for the inert, half-melted silver sphere and gently placed the rainbow-pulsing locus key into the main fracture point of the metal casing. The moment key met stabilizer, the whispering stopped. A deafening silence descended. The rainbow light of the key was instantly sucked into the silver sphere, turning it into a black void that swallowed all light. Ethan felt the full weight of the Chronos syndrome pressing down on him. The integration began instantly, violently. His memories didn't fade, they were compressed. He saw his entire life, the town's entire history, and every single duplicate version of Jesse Vance, all trying to merge into his single consciousness. That he closed his eyes and fought the integration using the only thing that made him different from Vance, his willingness to break the loop. He whispered the last thought of Silas Vance into the darkness: paradox. He didn't force the system to accept his present. He forced it to accept his most profound absence. That he remembered the unmarked graves in the null zone, the place designed to erase him. He remembered the modern plastic bin in the basement, labeled, Specimen 711, Do Not Open. With a final, conscious effort, Ethan forced his mind to become the moment of sealing the device. Not opening it, but hiding it. He integrated his consciousness not as the anchor who holds the now, but as the archivist who hid the key. The black stabilizer sphere roared. It was trying to anchor him in the now, but he was anchoring himself in the moment before the now. He was becoming the silence, the expectation, the secret. The light returned, not rainbow, not violet, but a cold, pale white. The black sphere, the now repaired stabilizer, shuddered one last time and began to shrink, compressing all the temporal energy into a small, portable form. It became a shoebox-sized device of matte black metal, with a single circular lens and a faintly glowing green LED, the chronometer. Ethan Cole had successfully integrated, not as the anchor of time, but as the fixed point of the archivist. He became the necessary secret that allowed the loop to continue without destroying the global timeline. He looked down at his hands. They were trembling, but they were still his. The locus key had vanished, fully integrated into the stabilizer. He was alive, but changed. The terrifying quiet of the perpetual now had settled into his mind, giving him a cold, objective view of reality. He picked up the newly formed chronometer. He looked at the label on the modern, plastic storage bin sitting nearby, waiting to be filled. He used a crisp, black marker to write, Specimen 711, Do Not Open, J. Vance. He sealed the box with industrial-strength tape, knowing he was completing the loop of the man he had become. The J. Vance on the label was not Jesse Vance the variable, but J. Vance the archivist, J. for Jesse, the fixed name of the anomaly, and Vance, the name of the system's creator. The entire valley outside had returned to normal. The Chronos syndrome was contained. Ethan Cole, the photographer who arrived in Echo Creek, was gone. Only J. Vance, the temporal acquisition specialist, remained. He exited the basement and walked out onto the street. The sun was rising. The silence was back, but now, it felt less like a threat and more like a carefully enforced rule. He had a new job, monitoring the fixed points, maintaining the integrity of the fragile, paradox-driven now. He had replaced Brenda, Agent Delta, and the entire Vance family, becoming the solitary guardian of the secret. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a clean, cream-colored card. J. DNC Temporal Acquisition Specialist, the Echo Creek Foundation, Archives Division, Recordings of the Improbable Present. He had become the cold, precise man who would soon track a freelancer photographer named Ethan Cole who dared to open a box marked Specimen 711. He was the keeper of the loop, the constant now, the silence felt expectant, like the